So, moving on to something which is less, I suppose, about our own identity, but nonetheless very much rooted in our landscape. I would like to talk about the news that this month, unfortunately, a 1,000-year-old oak tree fell over. Now, this is important because this oak tree was part of, or seemingly part of, Offa's Dyke. It marked the border between the Welsh, or the Welha, and the Mercians, the Saxons, in the Marches, in the land that separated, basically in Middle England, more or less where Birmingham, this kind of area is today. Separated these two groups of people, and this border, this dike was dug, and this oak tree seemingly was planted on that border. It had a trunk diameter of 11 metres, and sadly, now it's fallen over.
Right. Okay. Couple of questions. First of all, has the tree actually been dendrodated? Because oaks don't normally live more than about 1,000 years, and Offa's Dyke's older than that.
Okay, yeah.
Um,
Well, actually, it says here,
and
it might even have been planted in the 8th century.
well, that would make it, I think, the oldest. Uh,
It
I'm,
was
I'm, I'm not a tree
almost
specialist.
impossibly old.
Put it this way. Are we dealing here more with tradition of perception than fact?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, when, for example, when you've got a rather large ditch going through the local landscape, do you actually need to mark it with anything else? Unless you've changed the border, in which case you do need to mark it with something else.
Hmm. The question is, would that be okay with the local people?
I think we're branching out into fields we really should go. uh,
Maybe we should leave that alone.
I twig where you're coming from there. We're obviously barking up the wrong large wood countryside. No, in all seriousness, I mean, people. There's something about trees, isn't there? People do feel a connection with. I mean, there's even been a competition for the tree of the year over the last few years. That's been. I think Channel 4 ran it, and and you look at the pictures in the news coverage of this story, and you've got this great fallen object. It's something almost sort of heroic and tragic about it as well. When you imbue it with these sort of characteristics, and you immediately think of the fallen Ents in Lord of the Rings. When they're battling the hordes of Sauron,
Well, it's actually, it's funny you should say that, in so much as the one thing that this makes me think of is the way in which if this was planted, let's say at the beginning of the early medieval period.
Yeah, some point in the medieval.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and by early medieval, I mean, I suppose, early medieval, so maybe Normanish, maybe a little bit before them, possibly. If this was planted back then, there probably was still a fairly, probably a subculture, but nonetheless a strong connection to trees in Britain still. We know that the pagan Saxons, for example, venerated certain trees. Charlemagne infamously, apparently, led a mission to England to cut down a sacred tree at one point, just to try and make a point on behalf of Christianity. And this tree, the Buttington oak, probably, I think, and I suppose what I'm getting at to try and sort of answer your question here, whether it literally is and was planted as part of the border, or planted to mark a battle that happened in 893, I think, between Vikings and some Saxons and some Welsh. Whether it was or not, it was probably planted in and around that time, and it has been imbued with that identity, and I think that's possibly the saddest thing for me, is the fact that this sort of represents one of those trees that comes from a time. I mean, you reference Ents, but it comes from a time when people had that idea of trees. That trees were somehow, the Vikings had Yggdrasil, the world tree. The Saxons had something similar. It comes from that time, and I think that's a shame in some respects. But also, I'm not entirely clear on how it fell over. None of the news stories I can come across actually explain that.
You look at the pictures; it looks fairly diseased, hollowed out, and as though it had come to the end of its natural lifespan,
life.
whatever that is shown to have been.
Yeah.
So, death by natural causes—it's very sad, but it's part of the inevitable continuity of life. And
now, you were seemingly particularly amused by some of the comments on, for example, the Daily Mail article with regards to this.
I'm always amused by the below the line comments on the Daily Mail.
I mean, I'll let you sort of have a look for a couple of your favourites, but one here that I find interesting is this question of propagation. Why not have used micropropagation to get a new tree from it? Trees don't last forever. And I guess that's while you're finding your fodder. I think that's something which I find fascinating. Is this question of should it have lasted forever as well? Presumably, the people who would have planted that tree, maybe even as we've hinted, sort of maybe that there was this vestige of venerating trees. Partly, and this sort of stands up in some of the wider archaeological research going back into the Neolithic. Part of our understanding is that people venerated trees in part because they had a lifespan.
Yes.
And their death meant something. When they fell over, when they were inverted, for example, in certain barrows and this kind of thing, it was deeply
going back
symbolic.
to Mike Parker Pearson, one of the things he suggested is, for example, that wood represents life and stone represents death.
Yeah, yeah. And by definition, life ends, or life has a time.
Absolutely.
And so I think in some respects this response says something very particular about our time right now. This expectation that, well, of course we should plant another tree there, or of course we should have taken an element of this tree and keep it going forever. Was that even remotely the intent of the people who planted this tree?
And probably not. And also, unlike for example, the famous Glastonbury thorn, the Christ thorn, which is in its who knows what iteration now. It wasn't part of the local tourist trade going back to the Middle Ages and the medieval monks who wanted to attract people to to Glastonbury Abbey, and therefore needed to keep the Joseph of Arimathea's staff alive. So this tree, certainly in modern times, appears to have been fairly isolated for whatever reason. And
well, it's in a field by look of it, a farmer's field these days.
Yeah, exactly. And at a particular point in time, like in the last few months, it's come to the end of its natural life and it's come down for whatever reason, and that's how it happens. But I mean, going back to how we read things into it, and a lot of these have to accept a tongue in cheek. But if you look at the below the line comments on the Mail in particular, and the Mail is always rich in terms of its readers' responses on the website. We've got responses ranging from
rich because it's well fertilised.
Yeah, yes, well fertilised with certain fertiliser. Yes, we'll come to that in a minute. But we've got ranging from Mr. Correct, who said, "Who cares?" To All-Seeing Eye, who said, "God bless this wise old tree. Seen enough trespassers on its land live and disappear, but thankfully the one who originally planted it, thankful to the one who originally planted it there. It was time to leave this. Done you know." Or slightly more, we get a bit political here. Willie Boy from Birkenhead said, "I wonder if there are any UKippers who remember when it was an acorn." I think maybe suggesting that the people who support the United Kingdom Independent Party and Brexit maybe have certainly
an exaggerated nostalgia. Yeah.
Have an exaggerated nostalgia of an older generation. And perhaps my favourite political one, picking up that particular theme of UKIP and Brexit, it was Chief Angry Bear who said, "I think the EU did this. They don't like borders."
Oh, of course.
There we go.
Yes. They flew in an EU/UN attack helicopter.
Have you? Michel Barnier was seen with holding a chainsaw while Jean-Claude Juncker held his coat while he did it. Yeah, absolutely.
Unbelievable. Shocking, shocking. Yeah,
getting back to the history of the archaeology as we can, and again, we know, there are landscape markers all over the country, particularly in Wales. One of my favourite is, as a Welshman, please forgive my pronunciation, but the Eliseg Pillar outside of Llangollen.
Eliseg, good, yeah. Llangollen, yeah.
Llangollen.
No, Llan.
Llan.
No. Sorry, it's you asked for this. It's actually a common misunderstanding that the double L is a cl noise.
Oh.
So what you do is you form as though you're going to say L, so you put your tongue like l, and then you sort of blow. So
Llan. This is why I'm rich at languages. To be fair, I respect those particular issues very much, and but again, they're very much expressions of identity, and they mean a lot to people, and far be it from any of us to belittle that. And you say the Eliseg Pillar is, but is another example of a landscape marker that has survived. The difference there, of course, is that we've got inscriptions that actually at least date the inscription and state a purpose. Whereas with the tree, we're reading things onto it.
Absolutely. Which is, I think, in some respects, arguably part of the allure of a tree, is that it is it's a timeless entity, but people they draw all sorts of forms of strength from these entities as well. So, it's nice to see that people weren't just being entirely sarcastic in their comments on that. But anyway, we salute the fallen tree.